Hello, this is Jamie Mitchell, and we're back with another episode of the Libertarian Censored podcast, going over all the posts on the Libertarian Censored subreddit. Let's get right into it. So first we have Trump tariffs. Appellate court upholds order striking down trade late levies from Axios.com, posted by LegioX. And yeah, I personally don't care for Trump's tariffs, but Reddit was completely fine with tariffs when Biden was the one doing them, but suddenly Trump's doing them, and now they're the worst thing ever. Reddit really has no values other than being anti-Trump at this point. And yeah, I'm sure if Biden was doing these exact tariffs, they'd be completely fine with them. Biden did also have the high tariffs on China as well, just like Trump does. But Reddit didn't seem to care about when he did it, but it only cares when the orange man does it. As they always say, I was saying every episode now, most people don't have any values when it comes to politics, only teams, and you definitely see that with Trump and his tariffs. Then we have U.S. tells Denmark to calm down over alleged influence operation in Greenland from BBC.com, posted by XGH Thai 737. And yeah, I personally don't really care for the U.S. intelligence operations. But Reddit only seems to, or probably only cares about this one because it's in Greenland, and Greenland's one of the things that Trump really likes to push. So that's probably why Reddit's willing to call this one out, because Reddit's always has to be whatever anti-Trump, anything anti-Trump, whatever he pushes. And yeah, it's really as simple as that. If something's ever Trump coded like Greenland is currently, Reddit will be against it. I'm sure if Joe Biden said we should buy Greenland, Reddit would say that's a great idea, Joe. We need to buy Greenland right away. But since Donald Trump says it, it's suddenly the worst thing ever. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have, where is Donald Trump? Wild rumors swirl around President heading into weekend, so if this was Biden, they'd say he was not running the country. From PennLive.com, posted by Donald Key, and that's cross-post from the No Shit Sherlock subreddit, which has since been removed. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for Donald Trump, but with that being said, just because Donald Trump is aging and has health problems doesn't mean, Biden should be absolved. Personally, I would argue that Biden was probably in a worse state than Donald Trump is currently during his later years in the White House. But of course, on Reddit, it's pretty much verboten to say that. Like this guy right here said, his comment has that -1 points. Trump is an idiot, extremely egotistical and pedantic, and I'm unfit for office. But let's not begin to compare the level of senility that he and Biden were at. They were almost playing Weekend at Bernie's with Biden towards the end. Meanwhile, decisions that could have absolutely be seen as acts of war were being made. And I would agree with that. The thing is that, Donald Trump, Reddit wants to... Reddit thinks that if they post Trump is dead enough, that he's gonna die. But that's just Reddit for you. It's Reddit every day for the past 10 years is we have finally got Trump this time. And, and they never do get him. It's like the Coyote and the Road Runner, or Captain Dick and Captain Ahab and Moby Dick, or Tom and Jerry. Reddit constantly thinks they're gonna get Donald Trump, but it never happens. And yeah, personally, I think Reddit might be like, oh, he's at death's door, he's extremely weak, but it's like I remember one of the signs for fascism. One of the points was the enemy is both strong and weak, and you definitely see that when Reddit in regards to Donald Trump. They say, oh, he's going to drop dead any day now and be replaced by Vance, but they also say he's literally worse than Hitler. So it just goes to show you they think he's the strongest person ever, while also be simultaneously being the weakest person ever, and that just goes to show you, it's all about narratives to them. I think the only chance that Reddit has really of getting free from Donald Trump before January 20th, 2029 is if some delusional Redditor tries to take him out like Thomas Matthew Crooks did. He was probably a delusional Redditor. The Reddit's only... I won't be surprised if another delusional Redditor tried to take him out soon. But... yeah, personally, as I said, it's like a Tom and Jerry situation. What's Jerry gonna do? What's Tom gonna do when he finally gets Jerry? Then the show ends. That's why they're not gonna get him. And besides, when he does finally have to leave office or is otherwise kicked out or dead, Reddit will just move on to whatever the next boogeyman is, and they'll say, oh, he's so much worse than Trump. It's like back in the 2000s, they thought W was the worst thing ever, and now they think Trump's the worst thing ever. I'm sure next they'll think like J.D. Vance, Ron DeSantis, Vivek Ramaswamy, or whoever inherits or Tucker Carlson, you can throw him in there as well. Whoever inherits the Trump and the MAGA movement, they'll suddenly be the worst thing ever. It just goes to show if you're the Republican presidential candidate, Reddit will always see you as the worst thing ever, regardless of how bad you actually are. It's like the Republican Party could nominate the most milquetoast candidate possible, like Mitt Romney, and Reddit would still literally call them worse than Hitler. And that just goes to show you, they just only really care about the letter next to the name rather than anything else that people say or do. Then we have Trump asked Modi for Noble backing. His no brought 50% tariffs from FinancialExpress.com, posted by Empty Row 5585. And personally, I don't really care for Trump, and I don't think I know he wants the Nobel Prize because Obama got one, but I don't think he deserves it. I don't think Obama deserves a diver. I don't think Trump deserves a diver. The only good thing that would come of Trump getting the Nobel Prize is that it would make Redditors cry. And it would be nice to see Reddit. It's always nice when Redditors cry because they're such miserable sacks of human garbage. Who say, "Oh, I'm so empathetic. I care about everyone," but then you dissent from their official narrative at all, and they'll literally throw you every name in the book: Hitler, Nazi, fascist, etc., etc. And I'm not gonna say some people on the right aren't like that as well, but the Reddit leftist is truly is truly damaged. I think the brand of the Democratic Party beyond repair at this point. I think it might be a little hyperbolic, especially with how entrenched the two parties are, but I definitely wouldn't be surprised at this point to see the Democratic Party go into full collapse, especially because they seem to be that out of touch and they can't relate to the common person at all. They seem to care much more about LGBTQ, whatever other letters they've added to that as well, rather than the actual common and poor people. If you're a poor person, and the Democratic Party may say, "Oh, I support you," but then you dissent from their official narrative at all, and suddenly you're literally Hitler to them. So, that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have How Government Works, and that's a YouTube video from Behind the Business. This dude gets paid $100,000 a year doing absolutely nothing. It's a clip of some guy at the National Institutes for Research or something. And he says, "Oh, I pretty much do nothing. I just kind of look busy." And that's a lot of government workers. You just kind of look busy. We could cut pretty much like 90% of government jobs. Nothing would really change, I would say. But of course, on Reddit, that's fascism. Because it's like Reddit, when you cut size of government, that's fascism. Isn't fascism supposed to be the largest government possible? But no, on Reddit, fascism is as long as when you cut jobs and government jobs, and that just goes to show you, Reddit has used fascism so much as a word. They used it for pretty much anything they like or don't like. They don't like. And when you use the word fascism for anything you don't like, it ceases to lose all meaning. When you call, it's like the boy who cried wolf or Chicken Little. When you constantly yell, "The wolf's attacking me," or "The sky is falling," eventually people are going to start toning it out, and that's what you definitely see with Reddit in regards to the word fascist. Then we have Missouri GOP Senator Mike Moon defended child marriage, citing a 12-year-old's lasting marriage. Democrats condemned it as disgusting, opposing Republican resistance, posted by CH4Locks, and that's cross-post from the LOL subreddit. And of course, Reddit, every post on Reddit has to be Trump/Republicans bad. But, Reddit, they say, "Oh, minors can't consent to marriage," but yet they can consent to puberty blockers and all the gender-affirming care, whatever's marketed as, including top and bottom surgery. And that just goes to show you, Reddit will think, "Oh, when the GOP says something, Reddit will say it's the worst thing ever." But if the Dems say something, Reddit will 100% agree with it, and that's why people you can't really take Reddit that seriously. They have no values other than what the letters next to the name of the people saying it is. I'm sure if a Democrat said, "We need to protect trans kids," and that includes giving them whatever healthcare they want, even if it's something that they probably can't consent to, like top bottom surgery or puberty blockers or general hormones, Reddit would say slay queen. But when a Republican says it, suddenly it's the worst thing ever. It's like a Republican sneezes and Reddit, it's like, this is pretty much, it's like a Republican sneezes and then Reddit goes, Hitler, Nazi, Trump, MAGA, whatever other buzzwords they can think of, and eventually just start toning it out. Then we have Chicago just outlawed masked cops. ICE agents can no longer wear masks or hide their badge numbers from media.uplink.in, posted by CH4Locks, and that's cross post from the Chaotic Good subreddit. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for cops wearing masks. But that being said, it's interesting how Reddit wanted masks to be mandated in 2020, and they still want the Antifa to wear the mask. But when the cops wear it, it's suddenly fascism. And yeah, personally, I think if you want to wear a mask, you should wear a mask. But if you don't, you don't. But it's interesting how Reddit thinks it's fascism when they wear masks. But when their side wears masks, it's completely fine. And that just goes to show you, they don't have any values other than out group bad, in group good. Then we have someone put chains on the fence at the federal building and DHS is locked up in Los Angeles. Posted by Ragnar OKXG, and that's cross-post from the 50/50 Run subreddit. It looks like an Instagram video showing exactly that, the DHS locked in their building because of someone put chain links on the fence. And yeah, personally, I wouldn't go provoking the bearer of the state like that. But if you want to justify doing that, people will justify doing whatever they want to, regardless of the system of government in place. So if they want to justify doing that, that's on them. And yeah, it looks like that's about it for the Libertarian Uncensored subreddit since it's the last check. But I want to share some of my posts on the Libertarian Party USA subreddit as well. I posted the corporate press is factual but not truthful. That was a tweet from Michael Malice, and that was him quote tweeting Vince Cogliance. And that was said ABC reporter first to the name of President Trump written on the guns without mentioning that the message was kill Donald Trump. And yeah, it just goes to show you that the Reddit only seems to care that in regards to the corporate legacy media, Reddit only seems to care about Fox News. They'll make whatever bullshit excuses they can for something like ABC News or MSNBC, and it just goes to show you, they say, "Oh, I hate billionaires," yet they love the Democratic governor of Illinois who's a billionaire, and they're completely fine with billionaire-owned media like the Washington Post and New York Times. But they only care, as usual, Reddit only cares who's in the in-group and who's in the out-group. And I also added, the most common forms of gun violence are suicide and gang violence, yet the legacy media only pushes school shootings because they know it's the most effective for their gun control narrative. And that's my thoughts there. Then I also posted, will this Pride crosswalk turn teens into felons from Reason TV on YouTube? And I added, the more and more I think about it, the more I'm against Pride crosswalks, since roads are public, well, most of them. Any flag painted on them is officially endorsed by the state, which I'm very much against. If I painted a swastika in the road, I would probably charge of vandalism, for instance. And yeah, it just goes to show you, I personally think, the libertarian solutions maybe have private roads rather than public roads where you can paint whatever you want on them. But right now, since roads are public, you shouldn't be painting anything on them. And that's my thoughts there. And then I posted top 5 worst major party presidential nominees who never became president from a libertarian perspective. And I said, 5, Henry Clay, Democratic Republican in 1824, National Republican in 1832, Whig in 1844. Clay was for what he called the American system, and I linked to the Wikipedia page for the American system. And I said, an economic plan that was focused on high tariffs, a central bank, and government control of infrastructure and public land. Of course, nowadays those are all pretty commonplace, sadly. Back then, they actually had debate about it. It really just goes to show how far from libertarianism the U.S. has strayed over the years. 4, John McCain, Republican, 2008. Huge neocon rock that Reddit correctly spies around town with the 2008 election. Sadly, he had been relatively these days, just like his neocon rock predecessor in W, since the orange Baz didn't care for him. 3, Kamala Harris, Democratic 2024. I thought HRC's 2016 campaign is cringy stuff like the fight song at the DNC and Pokemon Go to the polls, but Kamala somehow found a way to run an even worse campaign. Reddit, of course, getting over backwards for her because it seemingly has no values other than Orange Man Bad at this point. But I bet you they couldn't tell you one thing she stood for other than the most generic statements imaginable, like she supports our democratic norms. The kicker is that she probably would have lost to any other Republican candidate by more. I don't think someone like Ron DeSantis is nearly as good a campaigner as Trump is, but he and any other Republican would have to deal with his baggage. 2 is I had Walter Mondale, Democrat 1984. During the 1984 debates, he said, "Let's tell the truth. Mr. Reagan will raise taxes, and so will I. He won't tell you. I just did." He probably thought this was the greatest gotcha moment in history. The electoral map from the election seemed to think otherwise. And 1 I put Horace Greeley, Liberal Republican, 1872. The most recent election in which one of the duopoly didn't nominate its own candidate. The Dems decided to endorse Greeley, so it's not split the anti-grant vote because they wanted Reconstruction to end. I'm sure for it still its way, Reconstruction would still be going on. Greeley and his newspaper, the New York Tribune, were pretty much the average Redditor and Reddit of the 19th century, respectively. Greeley did have neckbeard after all, so much so that Karl Marx, of all people, was writing articles for the Tribune. Frederick Engels admitted to using his byline a few times. Greeley proved to be such a weak candidate that he only managed to carry 6 of them 37 states and then proceeded to die before the Electoral College could vote. His wife had also died right before Election Day, so now we are stuck with Republicans versus Democrats forever. Thoughts? Anyone else you would add? And I also added, I would do a post for the best as well, but I don't have nearly as much to say about them. My top 5 were Reverend Orr, Alderman Parker, Democrat 1904, Winfield Scott, Lincoln 1852, Winfield Scott Hancock, Democrat 1880, Barry Goldwater, Republican 1864, and John V. Yates, Democrat 1924. And then I added Sam Hamilton, Democrat 1876, would probably include classical Liberal president as well. So yeah, that's my thoughts there, and I think we're gonna check the Libertarian Censor says, see if they look like the next news. We're gonna wrap it there. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.